Neat. All right. So we're going to be in Mark 13, doing the first 13 verses. We have 5 people here, so 3 people read 3, 2 people read 2. Yeah. 3 read 3, 2. However you please. I would you like to start us off? One. First.
No, wait, yes, okay. You said first 3 verses?
Yeah.
Okay. And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will be none left here, one stone upon another that will be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately,
Tell us when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled? Jesus said to them, Watch out, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many.
When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famine. These are the beginning of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to you.
And the gospel must first be validated. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, not worry before about what to say. Say whatever is given you. It is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit.
A brother will betray brother to death, father his child, and child will rise against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end. So this chapter 13, this is kind of the longest response Jesus has to anyone to any account in the before and after, but also just like to the disciples' questioning. So starting here in verse 13, we can see, the disciples are exiting the temple from where, in the past couple last chapter, Jesus was doing a lot of teaching in the temple, and this was likely the last time Jesus was leaving this temple, and his disciples are, they're in all of the architecture of the grand temple that they. Hannah, can you read 2 Chronicles 3:1? And then Michael, can you read 1 Kings 6:7? This is just a little bit of background on, what just the history of the temple.
and Chronicles what?
3:1. 1 Kings.
Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord to Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father, in the place that David had appointed, on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite.
So yeah, well, the person who built it was David's son Solomon, who God wanted him to build and not David. David wanted to. Since David had, did some wrong things, but also he staged a lot of wars. Probably wasn't the best thing. And then
Building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, and no hammer, chisel, or any iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built.
so this is kind of an interesting fact, maybe just because I liked it, but a lot of the temple was built, every piece of stone, everything was built off site and then brought to it. That because it was in a city area, they didn't want to disturb the peace and whatnot, be really loud, so they built a lot of the temple in sections and then moved it over and then put it in place where it needed to go. And, so yeah, the building was roughly 180 feet long, 90 feet wide, and 50 feet high. And the highest point of the building was 207 feet tall. You know, at this time, this is a very, very impressive. And the we know that this temple was built twice. The first time it was destroyed by the Babylonians, uh, who destroyed it, and then 400 years later, it was rebuilt by Ezra. How you read Ezra 3:11. Not just Ezra, but a couple. But
This, with praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. He is good, his love towards Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord. He is the foundation of the house.
we're going through the first verse. So yeah, I mean, this is just, you know, they're rebuilding it, and as they were building this, because this process took a long while to build, the rule of Herod came, and Herod came through, and he actually this is from my commentary. Now I kind of like how they summarized it. Herod the Great overran the temple and killed many of the priests. And then about 20 years later, he wanted to or like make good with the Jewish community. You know, when you go through all their priests, you really make them overjoyed with your politics. So he actually did lots of renovations, made the temple a lot more lavish, added a lot more. On the east side of the temple, it was gold, so that it would shine extra bright in the sun. It was a lot more lavish than what even it was when Solomon had originally constructed it. So that's just a little bit of basic history of the temple. But yeah, any general questions or other thoughts about the temple? There's a lot that goes on concerning. So
I think that's more interesting that you pointed out that it's more of a lavish type building because it makes sense for what.
no, yeah, I think it definitely goes into it. I mean, you can kind of, I think there's a lot of symbolism in where the Jewish leadership is, and also the building itself. It was a lot more lavish than it was really meant to be. It was a lot more for show. It was more of a prideful thing than it was a giving honor to God. So moving on to verse 2, we see Jesus' response. He says, and Jesus said to them, "Do you see these great buildings? That there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown." So, Jesus and his disciples are walking out, and I kind of found this verse kind of a little bit funny, just for the fact of like, the disciples like, this building's really cool, and then Jesus kind of is like, it is, but it's going to be gone very, very soon. But when we see Jesus is prophesying what will happen to the temple, and as we all know, the temple is later destroyed when the Romans besiege the area after a lot of political unrest and whatnot between the Jewish people and Romans. The temple had once been a place of worship, but then it became a place of consumerism and politics. When we saw Jesus had to drive out all the people in the courtyard who were selling it and selling sacrifices, things like that. So, and I think also we can see earlier, Mark, we talked about how Jesus kind of he separated himself from the Pharisees. Here we can kind of see how Jesus he separates himself from the temple. It's showing that it really hasn't, it's no longer stands for what it once has. how do you think the disciples have reacted? How do you think they reacted to, Jesus' words about the temple? Um,
Oh, well, that's real bummer.
yeah.
Like,
No, yeah, I mean, I think even just looking forward, in this next passage, they don't even ask Jesus, even when because he says this, they're definitely probably scared and confused at what he means, but they definitely, I think, kind of contradictory to what they've done in the past. They actually in verse 3, they ask, or in verse 4, they kind of ask Jesus, what did you mean by that kind of a thing? They're actually asking questions. Any other thoughts on verse 1 and 2? Kind of about before we get into the end times. All right. So starting off in verses 3 and 4. I'll read it here. And he sat on the Mount of Olives, opposite of the temple. Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the signs when all these things are about to be accomplished? So the Mountain of Olives was a hill on the east side of Jerusalem. This is likely where Jesus and his disciples were lodging at the time, while Jesus and them were at the temple when Jesus was teaching. Um, Jason, can you read Luke 21:37? 21:37. Just
each day Jesus was teaching at the temple. Evening, he went out to spend the night on the hill.
yeah. So we know also that Peter, James, and John were Christ's closest to Christ within the disciples. But in this case, we see that Andrew, Simon's brother, is included in on this. Um, why do you think the disciples asked this? Um, it's kind of an obvious question, I guess. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, the disciples were likely really rattled by this. I mean, you think this grand temple, then probably in a sense of security, they've been able to operate within the world at this point. But uh, Jesus is saying that it's all going to be destroyed. Not only is it going to be destroyed, but not a single stone would be pieced together after that. It wasn't going to be just a light logging of the building. It would then completely destroyed. Um, and they probably also started to realize, as they're traveling with Jesus, they're probably realizing that this kind of victory may not be happening as fast as they think. They're probably thinking again that Jesus is going to be this guy who wages war on Rome, and that it's going to be an easy done process. Jesus will set the kingdom, but here Jesus is saying we're going to lose the temple. Yeah. Thoughts on verses 3 and 4. This question that the disciples are asking. Any thoughts on maybe? All right. So starting out on Jesus' response in verse 5, Jesus says to them, see that no one leads you astray. So the word see in this in verse 5, its Greek word root is blepo, which this is one of those things where Greek has multiple word see has multiple meanings within Greek. And this specific see is more than just a very look at this wall kind of a thing. It's more of a be observant. There's something not too obvious going on here. See with a more malicious undertone. There's something going on. Someone's trying to sneak past you. Jesus is trying to call his disciples to be protective for themselves as far as false teachers. Who would these false teachers be? Who would want to lead the disciples? Thinking more as far as like maybe the context of, 3 years after this, and also maybe in times today, who would want to lead us?
That there's.
Kind of. Well, I was just trying to say, like, I was more just trying to be like, who are the enemies of the disciples and who are the enemies today that Jesus, I guess that would be better.
I mean, like last, maybe like. Yeah. There's normally this like central lays out how it all kind of like false teachers are kind of like this. And they the same.
I would say anybody that tries to twist scripture or make it some way where it's not, where it could get people to doubt or really think like, oh, but wasn't it this way? Or like, I'm not positive or sure, maybe it was that way, the way they said it was. I didn't think it would be those kind of people, or like where, say for example, like that it's wrong, and you look at it and it's wrong, and like, you're like, I'm not sure why, but I know it's wrong, like, and you just have to, like, not believe those things that people twist.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's definitely one of the many purposes of like the Holy Spirit to help us sway these things. I mean, we know of a lot of, Jesus impersonators and whatnot. I mean, a lot of people that, like, when we were talking about, at our event over at Hannah's house, everyone kind of had a response to who Jesus is, but also within people who claim to be Christians or Christ followers. You have multiple prophets falling in that, but also just plain evildoers and Satan, even within, there's people who just want purely just the destruction, purely want destruction, just have pure hate for the world. Those are enemies that want to lead us astray. And I think it's just important to know that, which I'm sure we all know, there's going to be Christians, people that claim to do good by Christ, but could not be further from it. So, any thoughts on verse 5? So, moving forward, verse 6. This is more Jesus is kind of warning more about, false prophets, impersonators, saying, many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. I think Jesus, he's educating people on, in these verses, he's educating people on what the end times will look like, or what to look out for in the immediate future, that what's going to come after Jesus. So, there's, like I just said, there's plenty of people who claim to be Jesus incarnate, people who claim to be the second Christ. And I think a lot of times, even like myself, I can kind of like, oh, those guys they're just loonies. They're crazy people. They don't have, I think we underestimate kind of their following in a way, or maybe that's just me, but an example that the Unification Church, which is a Korean-based church, was founded in 1954 by a guy named Sun Myung Moon, and they have an estimated 100,000 members in the U.S., but 3 million members worldwide. This is the guy who claims to be becoming Christ, and is leading a lot of people ultimately to their doom by claiming to be this Christ and claiming to perform these works. And this is just, this is a larger, one of the larger, false Christ that claiming.
Is that the on campus?
I don't know. I know it's a guy that claims to be it. I don't think so, no. I think that's different. I think that's different. But I mean, they could be the same, I'm not exactly sure, but this is, I think, if not the largest, one of the larger false church program, but I think it's a larger, it's big in Asia. But, Hannah, can you read 2 Corinthians 11, 14, 15? But like we've heard of plenty of like, horrible situations where people, led people astray at, wanting them to, self-harm, take their own lives. Horrible things can come from these. These people aren't just loonies. We need to be, diligent, um, and looking out for these cults, these groups that 2 Corinthians 11, 14.
And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds.
So I mean, it's just important for us to, that these people, they're not going to like make it obvious that they're trying to scam you to hurt you. They're going to come in really smooth, really soft, really easy, and you won't even notice that they're out to get you. I mean, there was before this Bible study, I joined the Bible study on this church called the very cold predatory group. They try and be very personal with you. They try and lure you in that way by appealing to your emotions. You gotta watch out. Any other thoughts on verse? Any thoughts on kind of maybe like false prophets, what they kind of look like?
I think kind of tagging along with that, because I haven't, that's kind of in like a Unitarian, not quite Unitarian, but kind of sort of where they do like chopper readings and talk to dead people and stuff. Mainly like when it comes to that, they try to come for people that have honestly been like church hurt. Like, like for example, like my aunt used to be Catholic, but she had gotten hurt or something at that church, and after that they came to her very welcoming, very warming, and oh, we would never do that to you and stuff. I think that's sometimes too like what leads people astray is like they get hurt, like you said, like playing off of people's emotions, like they get hurt and they're like, oh, we would never do that to you, and they show that they are warming and welcoming and stuff, and then that's how people just kind of get into that.
Any other thoughts? So our next section, verses 7 and 8. And when you hear of the wars and rumors of war, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the earth. So we see the first sign that Jesus gives to the prophets, to his disciples, are that of false prophets. And then this second set of verses, he talks about wars, political turmoil, natural disasters, and famines. And I think it's important just to make a note that it's not, we shouldn't relate that these are things that God's sending these wars, that God is sending these earthquakes and whatnot. I think a lot of times, you hear people, they make the comment of what kind of God would let this happen. But I think it's important to understand that, the atrocities of war, these natural disasters, they've only come into the world because of our sinful nature. We're the ones that, went against God, we're the ones who betrayed God, kind of thing. And we're the ones who wage war and commit all these atrocities. These world wars, these genocides, it's our inclination to be cruel to each other, but it's God's inclination to allow opportunity for that. He's not just simply allowing these things to happen. He's giving us time to come in.
This might be going on in that similar vein. That's kind of which is, I mean, I bet. Okay, right, but, I mean, a more telling question is looking on why do good things happen or bad things happen to good? Why do good things happen to bad people? And like, then there's also the question of who's really a good person.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a little tougher to talk
No,
about.
yeah.
But
I think a lot of this has that built-in idea that I'm sure we're all guilty of, is like the fact that, you know, we think of ourselves a lot more good. We think man has a lot more good than what it is. And I think that the ultimate, you know, evil that resides in all of us, that sin is deeply rooted. You know, the punishment that, I mean, the wages of sin is death, kind of a thing. You know, and it's a sad reality, but that's just the reality of, you know, it's also mentioned here, earthquakes. You know, earthquakes are definitely one of the most, they're one of the more destructive natural disasters. You know, we can face, you know, a lot of, you know, countries that, like countries in Asia face a lot of, earthquakes. In 2023, it was estimated that 66,900 people died in earthquakes. And you know, can you read Luke 21:11?
Yes, 21:11.
Yep.
Let's see.
This is just a parallel.
Oh, okay. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and pestilence. There will be terrors and great signs from heaven.
So in Luke, it goes even further than what like we stated here. It states, well, what does Luke here state that's different from what Mark's, as far as like other than earthquakes? Signs from heaven and pestilence, yeah. And I mean, I think there's also within this vein, I didn't go really deep into it. You have a lot of people that also believe that all these end times have already happened. They believe that, like, when Jesus died on the cross, there was great rumblings and great signs from the sky. They believe all this happened within that time, and that now we're living in the end times now, which is filled with its own things. And I didn't want to go down that route, but I do encourage you guys to kind of look into that. I think it's an interesting topic, but
I think that kind of the point, or maybe not the, but a point is we can see these things all different, right? There hasn't been a period of human history where there hasn't been earthquakes, kingdoms against kingdoms, nations rising against nations. Like these things are happening constantly. So believe that we are already in the times. It's already happened is believe that you see something that for sure, oh, it's happening in the next 20 years, right? It's kind of, I don't know, I forget where exactly the movie is, but there is a verse where it says, these things are present generation, and no man knows. Right?
yeah, I forget what that is. That would have been a good verse. But I mean, it also says like these are birthing pains within this. Like these things, they're just sad, but they're just the beginning. And I mean, you can look into Revelation when it talks about the scale of the earthquake. Whatever is going on in our day and age, they do not begin to represent what those talk about. When those talk about mountains being, completely shattered and islands sinking into the ground. The scale and a lot of the other finer details of that do not really coincide with what we see.
We'll go over that.
Yep. That will be. We'll see. But so going back a little bit, what do you guys think the difference between when it refers to, it says kingdom to kingdom and nation to nation? Aren't kingdoms nations and nations kingdoms? Is there a difference there that? Because it confused me initially when I.
The only thing that I can think of is like, with like, them like possibly referring to like the kingdom of heaven.
Religious nations, countries.
Yeah,
But-
kingdoms against kingdom.
But I'd like to see
No, yeah, that's what I have. You're pretty much exactly right. I mean, nation in Greek is ethnos, which refers more to a group of people that share a characteristic, whether geographical, familial, or tribal, whereas kingdom in Greek is rooted in the word Basileia, which is a more political meaning. Which that would probably be more of, the borders between, you could think country to country, political party, whereas ethnos nation would refer to, um, um, kind of the thing. Uh, but yeah, I think, and I also heard, and one of the commentaries that I looked to a lot, they referred to, and I didn't really agree, they believe that like that this was Jesus even like I can see it a little bit, but uh this was Jesus kind of foretelling like terrorism and stuff like that within like the ethos of it, of like fighting and warring over deep rooted hate and whatnot. But yeah, so Jesus is saying that even though these things occur, it does not mean that Jesus is going just because these horrible things are going on where it seems like it's the end times, it doesn't mean that Jesus is going to return at that moment. And we should not mistake these wars and these things for the end of the world. All these horrible things that go on and continue to go on are only the beginning. There's much more. This is not, one of the more exciting or happy things we will talk about. And, like Jason's kind of saying, these are things that happened way before we were alive, and they're going to be things that are going to happen way after we're gone. Barring Jesus' coming again. And you know, again, like we kind of mentioned, that when you compare these events to things that are kind of described in Revelation, they really don't compare. It's very clear that, it's pretty clear that we're still in that birthing phase, those birthing pains of um, um, so yeah, any thoughts on verses 7 and 8? Any other thoughts on the natural disasters, this kind of idea of political unrest, wars? So moving forward to verse 9, Jesus continues and says, be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before. So, again, this is not a verse that really feels good, kind of thing. It's, Jesus is warning the disciples, and this is something I think we can see a very direct correlation to like later in the Bible, where the disciples will stand before councils, governors, and other political or religious figures and be tested. They will be beat and many die. It's not like as soon as Jesus was died or when he was resurrected and ascended to heaven that the Pharisees and religious figures were like, all right, we won, we're done with this thing. They're still very much, they wanted to burn Jesus to the ground, his teachings, his followers, remove his name from the earth, kind of thing. They weren't just going to stop. The disciples were very much still in trouble. Uh, Michael, can you read Acts 54? Or 5:40, sorry. Acts 5:40, something. And then Alan, can you read Acts 12:2? This is just some references to This is actually, both of these cases are Stephen referring. No, the first one is Stephen, the second one.
His speech persuaded them. They called the apostles and then flogged them. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and let them go.
So yeah, then this is, they were teaching and, these councils, they did not like what they were doing, so they charged them, telling them not to do this again. Proceeded to beat them. Howling.
Acts 12 too. Had James, the brother of John, put to death.
So yeah, I mean, this is just like, very clear, like in these verses, Jesus is, he prophesied that, these people, his disciples, you will be flogged, and, you risk death, by doing these. So, that's all I have in verse 9. I don't have a lot of questions for these things, so if there's thoughts or interesting things you guys kind of have, or something I missed.
Actually, we're going through verse.
Yes.
I have some.
Okay, yeah.
I'll say it.
No, there's a lot here, and I was kind of, when putting this together, I was a little, didn't know the best way to really go. So then this is a little bit more messy. So, going into verse 10, Jesus said that the gospel must be first proclaimed to all nations. So, when speaking in terms of spreading the gospel to all the nations, I have just another couple like statistics. So, as far as the complete Bible, what we have here, it has been translated into a total of 700 total languages. For reference, there's about a little over 7,000 total languages current in the world, and this is a number that continues. The New Testament has been translated into 1,500 different languages, with smaller portions of the New Testament currently still being translated and about 100 more. And then there's at least one part of the Bible in 3,312 languages. And looking at different places, that there's differences of like a few hundred here and there as far as these numbers, but everything seems to generally stay the same. So, and this is a kind of a debated verse as far among like scholars. They don't know whether this is Jesus purely charging the disciples to go spread the word, or whether Jesus is kind of saying, is this Jesus saying that everyone needs to hear the gospel and then the end times will come? So where is that kind of line drawn? But I think I'll-
I think it might be kind of like a call to action, but I don't know,
no, I think you're exactly
Yeah.
right. I think I'd go into that a little deeper later.
he points out in the beginning verse, like verse 9, like this is what is going to happen to you. But in verse 10, he's saying in gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations, where it could be a possible case, like, yeah, like everybody needs to hear the gospel first. But I would think of more as like, but you guys should also this is what's gonna happen to you because you are following me. But do your part and also like share the gospel. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, my next question was, Jesus says in verse 10 first. So then what's happening after that? Or what is your guys' thoughts on what he's saying here? Is this more of a call to action, or is this, or do you think this is Jesus kind of, stating that this is something that needs to be done before the end? This was something I was trying to figure out. I didn't.
See, I think it would be a call to action because
That's where I
in
lean
verse
towards.
9, he points out what would happen to them.
And I think it could definitely.
It's like him reaffirming, like, yes, this is a scary situation, but this is what you decided to follow me.
Mhm.
where it's a scary situation, but the joy that we have within this is sharing the gospel.
Yeah. So, yeah. Now, any other thoughts on verse 10? So, going on to verse 11 here, says, and when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are saying. Do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but so, I think this goes further, Jesus, he's, foretelling and telling the disciples, like, you guys are going to court. Like, you guys, you're going to be put in front of these judges, these people, and you're going to be put to the test. But don't worry, you will have the Holy Spirit. But how exactly does that work? Is this something that, the disciples are just kind of like puppets? Or is this, they're kind of just ripping? How does this work?
And yeah, I mean, I never.
I don't know what, apparently.
If you something to say.
I like to think this in a weird way with like Moses, where like God was like, go to Pharaoh and tell him like what I need to tell you. And Moses is like, oh, but I can't do it at first. But then, he has Aaron. But basically it was like, it's like the Lord's like, I will tell you what you need to like, I will tell you what you need to do, and that's all you need to do, nothing more, nothing less. I think that's kind of like same way in this situation too, where it's like, it's like say nothing more, say nothing less, but just say absolutely what,
No, for sure. I mean, I think this is what I remember hearing somebody describe it, and I don't know if this is the best way, but it's like the same words, different font. Like the message is being sent, but it's being sent through this lens of, I mean, you can think of it through the Gospels. Now, each one is telling the same story, but in different ways, different things are emphasized. So I think, the disciples, they shouldn't be afraid of what they have to say. God is going to be with them. He's going to work through them and use them and have these words being said, but it's still the disciples. Um, but the reactions of these courts and everything like that, and they may not be what you would. They may not still, even though they're saying the words, the right words, what God is weighing on them, it may not change the situation, I guess is what I'm getting at. Jason, are you next, please? Can you read Acts 6:10-14?
Uh, but they could not stand up against the wisdom of the. But they could not stand up against the wisdom the Spirit gave. Then they secretly persuaded some. We have heard Stephen's blasphemous words against Moses and against. So they stirred up and the elders and the teachers of the law. They seized, brought him before the Sanhedrin. They produced false witnesses to testify that this fellow never stops against holy place and against the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus will destroy this place and charge the customs Moses handed.
So yeah, I mean, this is, Stephen, he was teaching, he was saying these things, and not only that, and in verse 10, it says, these people, their hearts were so hardened, they could not understand the wisdom and spirit with which he was speaking. The Spirit was with Stephen at this moment. He was preaching these words, but the people, they couldn't stand it, so much so that they, planted these people who were going to charge him of being a false prophet, these people were being, they were false witnesses. And claim things that he was saying things, and again, you know, you see the beginning, they were claiming that he was going to change, he was going against Moses, this Mosaic law that these courts and these council. The spirit was using Stephen, he was intimate, like as a vessel. Yeah, any thoughts on verse 1 before we go on our last section?
Well, what Jesus was saying about don't worry about what to be, what you're going to say, that also reminds me of Acts 4. But early on, so after Peter and John heal the crippled man named Jesus, right? They're brought together, they're brought by the Sanhedrin and like question them, like, okay, whose authority did you do all this? And then verse 8, it says, then Peter filled with the Holy Spirit said to them. So okay, that's a proclamation of the gospel right there, goes through. And then they're not even their enemies are going to be able to stand against them because they see. Okay, verse 13 says, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right there is also fulfillment of Jesus' words.
No, and I think I like the part where it's like these guys are common people. They shouldn't be talking this way. There's something evidently different about these guys, and yet the parts were still so hard. Even when it's sitting there staring them in the face, and they themselves are admitting it, they still don't. That can disconnect is still there. So yeah, verses 12 and 13. It says, and brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated for all by my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So, there's a lot of, we've seen in our world this idea, like this fanatic hatred of the Bible, of Jesus, of like these certain groups that you bring it up and they just can't stand to hear it. This hatred, it can be something that you may view it as this country, they don't allow Christians, they put Christians kind of it. That hatred operates at that level, but it can also operate in a home kind of a thing. There are homes in the U.S. that where, well, like it says here, where parent persecutes child or child persecutes parents based on, their faith in Christ. Are you next to read?
Sure, I can read.
Yeah, can you read Luke 12:51? And Michael, can you read Micah 7, verses 2 through 6?
Luke 12:51. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division.
Oh, can you read 52 too? 52 through 53. Sorry, I have written out wrong.
Now, for from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against.
I think even just reading this verse now, like what immediately comes to mind is also just, you think about the divorce rate in the United States, the scale at which that is at, this division, that's definitely probably a factor or a cause of this hatred and this division within families.
Micah 7, what?
2 to 6.
The faithful have been swept from the land. Not one upright person remains. Everyone lies in wait to shed blood. They hurt each other, hunt each other with nets. Both hands are skilled in doing evil. The ruler demands gifts. The judge accepts bribes. The power dictates what they desire. They all conspire together. The best The best of them like the briar, the most upright worse than the thorn hedge. The day God visits has come. The day your watchman sounding alarm. Now is the time for the confusion. Do not trust a neighbor, put no confidence in a friend. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace, guard the words of your lips. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man a man's enemies are in the members of his own household.
Yeah. So, I think what, these sections you know, even, within our families, the ones we come to, those who, we live with, we live by, even those people can be our enemies. There could be a lot of deep rooted hatred there that can be stirred up because you're a Christ follower or for any reason in particular. And these things can, result like first of all, parent or sons sending parents to death. I think this is another one of those things where it's really doesn't feel good. A lot of what we read here today, like it really doesn't feel good, it doesn't sound good. But these are opportunities for us to specifically in this case, it talks about this idea of endurance. We need to push through this, we need to cling to God, cling to Christ, his teachings, because that's what will result in this. It's as far as like this whole section, when we're talking about these wars, these false prophets, horrible things that go on, we don't want these things to happen, but as we've read, they're things that are going to happen. They're going to continue to happen. But that shouldn't mean that we're passive in these things, that we just, if war is going to happen, then let war happen, kind of a thing. These are opportunities for us to spread the gospel. When there's times in war, in these things where there's somebody comes to and talks hard how hard it is to live at home with the parents for X or Y reason. It's an opportunity for us to share the love that Christ has shared to us, the love that is represented in these words, to extend and have that saving conversation. It's very important. God is, he's allowed for redemption within this horrible sinful thing that man has caused. These horrible. But yeah, that's all I really have for. I'm sure I missed. Is there any other thought? You disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple thoughts, just.
Yeah,
We have time. I have some thoughts on this last, or specifically like the part says everyone will hate you. Right? I have I don't have issues with the verses, but there are some like ways that Christians have like interpreted, more maybe not interpreted, but like applied it in their lives that I think is really, not following what the gospel is saying. Like when we read a passage like this, it talks about us being flogged in the synagogues and everyone will hate us and we'll be arrested and brought to trial. Like we are in a lucky enough position in the US that we are in any crazy circumstances, we will never have to deal with anything like that. There are definitely parts of the world where that happens. I don't want to, but in our position right now, we don't deal with that. We have to deal with our own trials, certainly, but by and large, the most persecution that you might face by saying your faith is somebody probably tell you, I don't like Christians. Like that maybe like the largest kind of persecution. I found like vast majority very indifferent,
Mhm.
right? So if we read this and we read everyone will hate you, that creates a very, I don't know, it divides Christians and non-Christians in a way not consistent with how the gospel creates this kind of animosity and atheism. Oh, Bible says you will hate me, Christian. Therefore, I will act like you are going to hate me.
Yeah.
Right. And you see that a lot in like Christian media, Christian movies. There's always that atheist professor that I don't know hates Christians and
Just outgoing, going out of his
all
way
all
to-
atheists are just anti-Christian, and that's not really an accurate. And I've seen that, and there are people that are like, but I've seen that divide really make people hesitant about, being comfortable in their faith, even around people that aren't Christian,
Mhm.
right? Like I work with a lot of, like both here at I and my other job, that there are not a lot of Christians, right? And if I think, oh, all these people are going to hate me because I'm Christian, it would stop me from like casually bringing up that, oh, I'm leading a Bible study this Wednesday. Like that. I'd avoid talking about those things. I felt that animosity. We can't let that stop us. The thought that these people aren't what I believe, therefore they'll be against me. Let that stop us from being comfort. Those are just, I don't know, some thoughts.
No, I think that's a very good thought. I mean, I think, uh, I definitely see that within like older Christians, or I can even see me with that in like certain things. I know like, some family members will say where like it's like, I don't really see that divide, and I know I'm certainly probably going out more than you are, kind of a thing, where everything seems like that's well, I mean, like there's
What is
like
that supposed to be?
like just people in my family that like they're very close off. They're staying.
Oh,
within-
not me.
No, not you. No, not you personally. I'm talking about like this like this
nerd.
yeah, a man no, like people like in the family that they stay within their house. The only world they're getting is through their phone. And they get these weird uh you know pre dispositions for certain.
I don't know, animosity and like predetermined division amongst people really leads to a lot of like fear mongering, like us versus them, and it's like conspiracy.
Yeah.
Hatred,
Mhm.
right?
I would say, like, with that being said, like, in ways, like, you can see more and more now these days a little bit, how, like, we can see a little bit of, like, little discrimination against Christians, where it's like some places where we go and stuff, or things that we do, where it's like, well, it's like socially, like, it's like you're being somewhat discriminated against, like, you catch the vibe and stuff, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not really appreciating. I think, we are only just scratching the surface as to what it is or what it potentially could be in the future, but there are definitely, most certainly places in the Middle East where there are people who are literally like beheaded for being Christian.
Yeah.
And like, we don't hear about that whatsoever. Like, you don't hear about that on the news. You don't hear about that anywhere. That stuff is totally, completely untracked or, like unreported or unmentioned or unsaid, but we know those things are happening,
Yeah.
But I do believe though that there will come a time where it will get more difficult and it will get harder for us. And it's just right now because we live, I mean, like, America is like, like, we don't have like a set religion, but there's still people that think like, oh, America is like 100% Christian or so, and it's like this. But, I think that it's only scratching this, like, what gives
Mhm.
it.
I definitely, I think you can see that even within like, you think of the founding of the US. Pretty large, Puritan Christian influence within that, and nowadays you have a lot more like, you know, this idea like there is like separation between, like state and religion and whatnot, but like you think about a lot of like who, personally, founded the country and like stuff like that. I think US at least, a lot of those values were there where maybe within other countries that was never the case. It's just kind of a weird, the US is kind of in a weird position, just based on the circumstance and the people that put it together. I don't know if that's one of these, that's, you guys agree with.
I think we could talk about kind.
Right, yeah.
Any other thoughts, on this first section of chapter 13?
And say like, I like how, at least at the end of chapter 13, how like you said, there's a lot of not so great stuff to hear, but at least like with the last verse it is ended with like a glimpse of like hope. At least, where it's like, this isn't just for anything. It's not all just for nothing.
Yeah, and this is very much just the beginning of a whole chapter of, I mean, there's 37 verses in this chapter, and we just we just did a third of what, Jesus' response is. I'm then going to build and build more. I think that's the next. But, all right, so if there's nothing else, we can get into some prayer requests.
Sorry, stop recording.
Confidential information.
So Alicia, I don't know if you're listening or not, but we're gonna get into prayer requests.